Hi, I'm David Hughes, and I'm delighted to talk to you. I'm all the way from Wales, and it's cold here, and I know it's cold with you too. So a big presentation, lots of slides, but I know that they'll be on the Beef Farmers of Ontario website should you want to look at them in more detail, looking at the post-COVID consumer and the challenges and opportunities for Ontario beef producers. Let's go. Number one, I always like to start off globally. You know that in our world, we've got 7.8 billion people. That's a lot. And look, there's Canada. I mean, wonderful country, but 38 million, a dot in terms of population, but huge in size in terms of area. And of our 7.8 billion, 80%, the better, 75%, I should say, of all our consumers are either in Asia or in Africa. And if we fast forward 30 years, we're going to add another 2 billion people to our world. And yes, the vast majority of them will either be in Asia or Africa. Actually, the huge growth in population over the next 20 years will be in Africa, where we're going to see a doubling from 1 billion to 2 billion. And I'm very Africa positive. I lived there for 5 years, and I often wonder, is that a sort of brilliant food marketing opportunity, or is it a series of social problems, or probably some combination? Irrespective, I don't think you'll be exporting a lot of beef to Africa, but that's another matter. But let me move on. Look, this isn't a COVID talk, but we are in the times of COVID. And just think back, it's what, 11 months now, 11 months since we first went into lockdown in Ontario. And what did consumers do? The same as consumers all around the world. They raced out to buy when they had an opportunity to buy what? Comfort food, old favorites, storables, indulgent snacks. On meat, it was for ground beef in particular. In the UK, we sold out of ground beef in a matter of days. You couldn't buy it for love nor money. In Canada, I bet people nipped out and got, well, of all the things was flour. We hadn't actually baked for a decade, or decades, I should say. And then suddenly Robin Hood flour was missing off the shelves of most supermarkets. And they sold so much, they actually ran out of the iconic yellow packaging. Can you imagine? Loblaws did well with its value price meats. So the same sort of picture right round the world, for goodness sake. And what of COVID? Well, my view would be that actually the experiences we have during COVID, and we're still in it, will have a huge impact on how we behave post-COVID. And the fact of the matter is that we've all had different experiences in different countries. Let's take the UK. We've had 4 million cases of COVID-19 and 115,000 deaths. Huge. In Canada, I mean, you've got half the population, but your death total is a quarter or a fifth of ours. Still hit heavy, but just pop down to China, 1.4 billion. Remember, that's where it started, for goodness, Wuhan. And in terms of total deaths, less than 5,000. So when I look at what's happening in China, they're still very careful with what they do, but essentially their economy is opened up. Internally, you can't go in, but if you're Chinese, you're in there internally. And restaurants are open, people are walking in the streets, they're snacking. So they've sort of gone back to normal. That's far from the case where we are. And I think will just take longer to go back to normal because of the very rigorous, vigorous COVID sets of experiences that we've had. And for me, one of the biggest impacts has been the impact on household income. Here's some US data. And what it shows, it's the same in Canada, that through this 1 year of COVID-19 that we've had, actually high wage workers have, yes, they saw a dip initially, but actually their incomes have recovered pretty well. And in fact, there's a lot of relatively well-off people in Ontario or in Canada in general that have got more cash now than they had 12 months ago. Why? Because they've been working from home, they've been paid full salaries, they haven't got on expensive holidays, and they haven't had to pay for commuting. And those who've been hit hardest are low-wage workers, and that's right around the world. So what, apart from feeling sorry for them? Well, actually, the biggest impact is on retail, because grocery retail is seeing those badly hit households and saying, we're going to have to handle their requirement for lower prices. And you can see this full-on price war starting to emerge in COVID-hit countries. It's certainly happening in the UK, and it will happen, and I believe is happening now in Canada. And I think just so let's link that to beef or to meat in general. Here I've got a Chinese slide, and it shows what has happened very quickly in China, because of the evolution of the economy, it going up, but also accelerated by the experiences in COVID, is that we've seen household income differentials within a country inevitably leading to tiering in food markets. What do I mean by that? I mean where you expect to see, let's take beef, where there will be something which is best, but then better. So good, that's the bottom tier, then better, then best. So COVID-19 has accelerated income polarization, presenting beef market opportunities at various price levels. And you've got to ask your question from a farm business point of view. Do you want to be the top end or the bottom end, or indeed both? Because you're probably going to be servicing both ends of the market. And also, just while I'm on meat, this isn't COVID related, but it's an old slide for me, but it just reminds me that there's a global battle internationally going on in the meat industry. And where it's most intensive is between chicken and fish, or more specifically, industrially produced chicken and industrially produced fish, i.e. farm fish. And that scramble for value that was seen through COVID will just intensify that battle. And my view that from a beef point of view, you just want to be as far away from that battle as you possibly can, because you can't compete with intensively produced chicken or indeed intensively produced fish. If we take fish, Pangasius, which is often sold as catfish, or bassa in North America, that converts, the feed conversion for that fish is 1-to-1. 1 kilo of feed gives you 1 kilo of fish. No wonder it's inexpensive. And wherever I go around the world, and when I can travel, 2019, when I was traveling full time around the world, what do I notice? That beef prices in most countries are substantially higher than the next meat down, which is often pork. And it reminds me, you've got to ask yourself, what's the consumer relevant point of difference for beef? Why can we charge more for our product? And within beef, what's Ontario beef's point of difference? I'll come back to that. Let me move on. Again, from a COVID point of view, what's happened at grocery retail, at food retail? Well, right round the world, including Canada, of course, we've seen this move to online food retailing. Canada, to be fair, was slow into this, as was the US, that the proportion of people using online retail shopping for grocery in Canada was small in the great scheme of things in 2019, but it's accelerated strongly through 2020 and is continuing to do so now. But that's happened right around the world. It was always much stronger in Asia. Go to, say, China or Korea, where the better part of 20% of all groceries, all food, are bought online. In Canada pre-COVID, it was less than 2%. So online grocery going like a steam train. But also what's happened, this is linked to, as I mentioned, this sort of lower income for those who started off with less income, is this move towards full-on retail price wars. And it's been led by hard discounters. Now, in Europe, that's Aldi and Lidl, German hard discounters. Aldi is in the US. It's not in Canada, but it may well be in the future. And these are smaller stores with a limited offering, but very, very low prices. And they affect the entire market. I'll give you an example here. So in my own market in the UK, Tesco is the market leader. It's sort of the Loblaws of the UK. Well, to compete with Aldi on beef, for example, Tesco has its own private label beef, which they call Boswell Farm. Farmers hate that because it's not a proper farm, it's just a made up one. And they price Boswell Farm's diced beef, as you can see from my slide, directly with Aldi on the same product. and it's very, very low price. So what's happening in this retail price war environment is that hard discounters are pushing mainline supermarket chains to lower their prices. I'm seeing that right round the world. In the UK, here's Sainsbury's, the #2 retailer, saying we must take on Aldi in the supermarket price war. When you see a supermarket say that, that's not good news for producers, typically. And actually, what's intriguing is this was happening pre-COVID, and it's certainly going to happen at an accelerated post-COVID, is that traditional supermarkets are actually slowly losing market share in the food market. And who are they losing it to? To online grocery retailers, which could be themselves, but also could be Amazon and other players, and also to discounters. So in Europe, the lion's share of European food retail growth over the next 5 years will be online and through discounters and not through supermarkets. I think we're in a period when the traditional supermarkets, those without omni-channel shopping, are drifting, like cowboys into the sunset, frankly. Who did badly and is doing badly? Well, it's food service. Here we're saying, can Europe's restaurants survive the coronavirus lockdown? Food to go, small shops have been really hit hard as we've all been locked in homes. And actually, that's really hurt the farm end for those who specifically were servicing the restaurant market. Although in general, I think agriculture has had a good COVID. The fact of the matter is, around the world, that consumers continue to eat roughly 3 times a day. And so there's been strong demand for food. Whereas, for example, if you're in the airline industry, then you really took it in the rear end. And so for the foreseeable future, is it sort of bye-bye restaurants? Well, no, we've seen this emergence. It's fabulous, isn't it? Of these sort of restaurant meal delivery platforms. Look at North America. Well, specifically, let's take the US, for example, where DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates, and Grubhub, these are all online delivery platforms for restaurants, have now got the better part of 90% of the total business for restaurant meals delivered direct to consumers. So consumers can't eat out, and they're electing to eat out in. Is that happening in Canada? Of course it is. I mean, the example best for me would be Skip the Dishes, which has done so well in Canada. Who owns Skip the Dishes? Actually, a company called Just Eat, which is a Dutch and British company, and they're in 20 different companies. So suddenly there's a new route to the consumer, and it's a man on a bike, typically. And is this just a North American thing? No, absolutely around the world. Here we are in China, where it's a huge, huge business. There are 2 companies, Alibaba being one, which is the Amazon equivalent, if you will, in China, and then another one called Meituan, that just monopolize the delivery of food from restaurants direct to consumers. Meituan has 750,000 drivers at its disposal. Even though that's an army, they could take over the world. And of course, there's other ways that food is reaching consumers, not least meal kits. And again, in Canada, probably HelloFresh might be the one that is best known. Is it Canadian? No, it's German. How many countries is it in? Probably 15. Look at its stock price over the last few years. Its stock price has doubled since March 2020. It's got a market capitalization of 20 billion Canadian dollars, 16 billion US, give or take. And also, increasingly too, I'm just popping this in because we've been in a Valentine Day environment, 14th of Feb and all, that increasingly consumers don't want to buy ingredients. They can't spell the word ingredients. They want to buy meals. They're looking for meal solutions. And here in my market was Marks and Spencer's, a premium food retailer, with its Valentine's Day deal. And so for Canadian $35 per couple, you get delivered to you a starter, which is prawn cocktail, a main, which might be sirloin steaks with heart-shaped butter, a side, could be veg or chips, French fries, a dessert, some nice profiteroles, a bottle of Prosecco, and a small little bunch of chocolates, all for $35 per couple. That's a good deal. It amused me because I looked at the American equivalent, just going beneath the 49th parallel, and here's Crowd Cow, online meat platform in the US, know your farmer, eat better meat. But it just for me underlines the heartier appetites, particularly the heartier Valentine appetites that Americans have, where the offer for two there was for over a kilo of meat for two people. I mean, given my age and that of my wife, I mean, a kilo of meat lasts us 2 weeks, for goodness sake. So you can see this coronavirus pandemic is changing the way shoppers behave and the way that they shop, and also the way that when we eat out, when we get an opportunity to. I wonder, for example, is it bye-bye Canadian buffets? You know, remember pre-COVID, we all love to go to a buffet, eat as much as you want, you know, for $10, $20 or whatever it is. It'll be a long, long time before we're self-serving ourselves from buffets. And so what impact has COVID has and what impact will it have? And I've just here, just to simplify for you, I've noticed that through COVID, it's either accelerated trends or decelerated them. So I've said it's either more of or less of. So let's look at work, shop, play, health, trade. For work, there's more work at home, which means more home snacking, more home meal preparation. There's more local food to go in the little shop just around the corner. We shop online more. There's more local shop use rather than going to a mall. People are buying more frozen foods because they see the convenience of that and less waste when they're locked in. There's new routes to the consumers, like restaurant meal delivery platforms. There's more home entertainment. So what? Well, that means we try to construct meals which will give us a big night in, and that we eat out in, where we get the restaurant to deliver to us. On health, we say we're eating healthily. I'm not quite sure. And some of us say we're doing more home exercise. And in trade, there's more interest in food security and food safety. Travel, well, if we have any at all, certainly for holidays, there'll be more at home. And then there's the less side. There's less at the office. And as a result of that, there's less work socializing, less urban food to go, less frequent shopping. And for some, there's less household income, which means they'll trade down by lower value beef cuts. But for some, they've got more money coming out of this and they'll look for premium end. There's less theater and cinemas and gyms. And we say there's less unhealthy food, but I think actually people's weight have increased through COVID, not gone down. And there's certainly less international trade. And that's an important point, because I noticed being followed, during COVID, if we went back to 2020, there was Canadian exports were constrained because of perceived COVID problems in meat processing plants in Ontario and indeed in the prairies. But that still goes on, that China and Chinese consumers are shunning imports because of their concern that if they buy something that's imported, that it may have the deadly virus lurking on it. So there's a clear and present danger for meat exporters relating to concerns about COVID-19 contamination. Do we have convincing emergency responses, I'll ask. So let me get more meaty now. And first, some statistics. I'm not a big stats guy, but if I look at Canada per capita disappearance of meat over the last 10 years, then actually it's been pretty stable. In anything, it's just ticked up a little. Actually, the meat where you see most of the ticks, and we know this well, is chicken. Here it is going from 37 kg up to 42 kg. There's been concern that beef consumption is in decline, but actually over the last 10 years, well, actually over the last 5 years, it's been relatively stable. That's good. And pork consumption has been stable too. Actually for beef, as you know, if you look over the last 40 years, there's been a distinct downturn. When I first moved to Canada in the 1970s, beef consumption was substantially higher than it is now. So there has been a movement down, but not recent. I think it's stabilized. But the market for protein has just grown and grown and grown, but it doesn't have to be meat. If you look on supermarket shelves now, every product is just claiming protein. Milk is high in protein. Here's a soup with spinach and peas with a source of protein. We've got milkshakes, which are high in protein, cookie dough, chocolate chip, high in protein, Gray's protein bites. We've got snack bars, which are high in protein. So the protein umbrella, as I like to think of it, has just got broader. Meat is part of that and a very important part, but it has more competitors, I would suggest. In fact, if we wish, and would you wish, you could eat insects. It's the European Food Safety Agency has just given the tick to yellow mealworms to be safe for human consumption. I don't know if I'd tuck into them, but I do think that they'll be very palatable for our pampered pets, and indeed for chicken, pork, and for aquaculture. So I can see insect protein being a big thing in the future, but probably not for humans. Okay, quickly, just looking at why is chicken so successful, astonishingly successful? If I looked at its impact in the US, for example, taking a longer time period, over 60 years, you can see the white line just going to the ceiling. Whereas again, you can see a bit of challenge for beef, which in the US too has tended to drift down, although just like in Canada, more recently, it's stabilized. And with everything else being pretty stable. So chicken has been great success. Why? Well, you know, the last time I was in Canada, which was actually 2020, end of January, so almost a year ago, here I was in a shopping mall and there was a McDonald's. And what were they saying? Chicken for breakfast? Yes, please. You know, you add another eating occasion and you will drive consumption. It's just a shame most folk don't eat beef for breakfast. But some of the reasons underpinning chicken success is that they tick so many boxes for consumers. It's affordable, it's perceived to be healthy, it's versatile, you can use it in so many ways, it's snackable, it's easy to add a taste to it, you can eat it hot or cold, kids like it, it's very popular with food service, it's widely available, and it's religious neutral. So that's important checklist for consumers, but they also have a citizen checklist. And all meats struggle to a lesser or greater extent here. Is your meat climate friendly or environmentally friendly or sustainable? Is it animal welfare friendly? Is it human health friendly? And chicken has an ambivalent position on the citizen checklist. Mind you, so does beef. You don't get all the ticks, particularly on climate friendly and the environment. I'll come back to it. Look, a lot of people in the livestock and dairy industries get sort of fussed about the emergence and the power, perceived power of fake meat and fake milk. But just a quick word on this. I mean, two big companies, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, over the last 15 months, they've attracted over $1 billion worth of venture capital, and they're expanding all around the world. I see it wherever I go, but from a very, very low base. What sort of astonishes me is that people are looking at this growth and saying that it's going to be stellar and it will continue at the same rate. Here we are, A.T. Kearney, a well-known sort of international management consulting company, saying that by 2040, conventional meat, the meat you produce, will only be 40% of the market, and that cell-cultured meat and plant-based meats will be the remaining 60%. Not so, as far as I can see. There is place for fake meat, for plant-based meats, and also for cell-cultured meat, but it will always be in the minority. But I see plant-based meats all around the world. It's not just a silly sort of North American or European thing. There's growing interest in Asia. Here we are. For goodness sake, the Colonel is even into plant-based chicken nuggets in China. And of course, as I mentioned, there's cell-based growing meat in the laboratory and then putting that on an industrial scale. The Israelis are good at this. These Aleph Farms, who have just produced, they can now produce a thicker cut cultivated ribeye steak. There it is on the right. And then they can 3D print it. Is that a big deal? Should we worry about it? Not in the immediate term, but it will find its place over the next 20 years. I would suggest. I think more of a concern for me actually is what might happen to the leather market, because now you can grow leather from a hide cell. And you can imagine that impact on, say, the price of hides. If that sort of reduces it, it reduces profitability in the beef industry overall. But moving on. And what I notice in plant-based meats is that big food is coming in. Here's Unilever. They bought the vegetarian, Unilever is one of the biggest food companies in the world, and they bought the vegetarian butcher, and they're expanding plant-based Whoppers, which they do for Burger King in Latin America, the Caribbean, and China, as well as Europe and elsewhere. Here's the vegetarian butcher, and here are some of his products. And I'll come back to that because they're very consumer orientated. Here's an important point. On the left-hand side is how we still, to this day in the UK, sell meat in supermarkets. This is Tesco, our leader. And just for example, Tesco diced beef, Tesco beef brisket. Most people under the age of 40 would have no idea what brisket means. Tesco medium beef roasting joint with basting fat. Most people would sort of gag at the thought. Tesco small beef silverside roast. No idea what silverside is. How Unilever presents it, and their target market here are younger, well-educated, higher income mums with so small children. Look, it's all sort of schoolboyish, but it's very consumer driven. Little Willies, what the cluck, unbelievable burger, Little Peckers. And I think their products are consumer focused and reflect demand pull, whereas often red meat products tend to be production led and driven by supply push and have names that people find, younger people have difficulty relating to. I see the same. I was on the Loblaws website. It's very similar to the UK. I think for millennials and younger folk, we need to work on more consumer-friendly product names and product forms on the retail shelf that look less like traffic accidents. Here we are at the bottom. In the UK, in every supermarket, there's always a lamb product, which is called half shoulder of lamb knuckle end. This is 2021. What's that name? It looks like the aftermath of an appalling axe murder. It has to go. We have to be more consumer focused. I was pleased to see with Brexit, UK exiting the EU, that now we can't export some of the fish we wanted to Europe. And actually, they're now looking to change the name of fish, which we find too frightening. So, for example, on the left-hand side, sole fish, it's a lovely fish, but it's called migrem sole, and nobody will buy it. So change the name to Cornish sole, and it's a lot better. Similarly, spider crab. I hate spiders, but I'll buy Cornish king crab. See what I mean? It's about the name. Okay, moving, what we've seen this sort of acceleration through COVID has been this increasing interest of consumers, which was already there pre-COVID, on environmental issues and sustainability issues. And this emergence of the notion of climate-friendly and planet-friendly diets, they're gaining substantial traction. Just ask your kids and grandchildren in my particular case. And we've all got to know the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. I think Greta's now 18, very, very influential. She's also very irritating, but that's another matter. But that's right across the world, I see this. And what's more, she's supported by the UN. So what from a livestock and dairy point of view? Because a lot of what the narrative is about, it's about cutting meat and dairy intake. In the UK, we've been asked to cut by a fifth. By who? By our own government. And increasingly, every year, you'll get influential research going out. Here's one from the middle of 2020, which is called the Eat Lancet Commission, very influential. And it measures food's impact on the environment, that's vertical, and then horizontal on human health. Where is unprocessed red meat and processed red meat? Up there, high on environmental impact and high on its negative health impact. It's seen as the more devil food, whereas down on the other side, you get the good guys, if you will, the angels, nuts and fruit and veg, etc. And diets for a better future. Last week, there was another influential report, Chatham House, in association with the United Nations. It was food system impacts on biodiversity loss. And it was just asking us to change our diets. Whenever you see that term, it means more plant-based, reduce meat. They want us all to leave more land for nature and to farm more sustainably. I'll come back to that again. And just expect, this is negative, but it's just the reality. I think in the livestock business, we've got to expect there's going to be more and more pressure put on us. Climate campaigners are turning their focus from fossil fuels to meat. They think they've won, and they have won the fossil fuel argument, and now saying, now we're going to do to fossil fuels what we can to meat, i.e. reduce meat consumption. It's a threat, and we have to defend against that. And we have to expect at some stage in many countries, there will be a carbon tax on livestock. It'll be carbon tax in agriculture, but particularly on livestock. So what should we do? Well, particularly with carbon, if I look at sort of livestock and beef in Ontario, I'm sure that you do have a climate action program. And I'm just sort of impressed when I see, let's go away from meat towards Nespresso, you know, the little capsules of coffee that Nestle make, pledging to be carbon neutral by 2022. That's like next year. What have they done? They've made a promise. They explain the journey. They report on their progress, and then they deliver on the promise. We can do that too. We don't have to be carbon neutral, but we have to show consumers and particularly activists that we are making an effort in this area and that we're on a journey, and they will be supportive if they know that we're on that journey and that we're moving to a better place from a climate impact point of view. I see it happening right around the world. Here's one of the big Brazilian beef exporters, Marfrig, launching carbon neutral beef brands, for example. Why? Because they were being dropped by big investment companies because they were showing lack of commitment to sustainability issues. And look the way the market's going. Expect to see that shortly on every food product that's sold at retail, you will have to put a carbon score, which will show your carbon impact for the product that you have produced. And so I'm saying, what's the Enviro? I call it the Enviro score. What's the Enviro score for your beef product? It's, you know, is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? It's already happening. Here's oat milk, which the dairy farmers love to hate, but it already has its carbon impact on the pack. Here's corn, which is a mycoprotein, a pretend meat, a fake meat, if you will, already has it. That's coming. It's being pushed not only by government, but also by the market. Expect to see Enviro scores on beef within 2 years. And it's already happening. Here we are in North America, in the US in particular, Panera Bread and Chipotle, the casual dining restaurants, where they will put the carbon impact for your meal in front of you. What about on human health? And where do we stand with regard to meat? I mean, one thing about COVID, it's shown that those in ill health, particularly those who are obese or have diabetes, then they have a much higher health risk associated with coronavirus. And so we're starting to see more and more government pressure to ask us to eat less and much more healthier and to exercise more. And I would expect just to see this to move from nudging, which they've done in the past, towards taxing. They will try to change our diets through taxation to improve our overall health. And in some cases, we need to do this. I mean, look at this. This is the adult obesity rate by state in the US. And I've just quickly 1990 through to the current time. If your state is greenish or blue, that's sort of good. But look what's happened over a 30-year period. The more red and purple it gets, the worse it gets. And what it shows, we've gone from relatively healthy in 1990 to 2020, where the better part of 40% of adults are clinically obese. Is that good? No. Well, that tells me government are going to be in there and they're going to regulate because they can't afford the healthcare costs associated with obesity and diabetes. And that doesn't matter where you are. And is just the US overweight? We know so. Look, Mexicans, Canadians, Brits, Aussies, Kiwis, none of us are hardly slender. We all have to do better. In health, what intrigues me, particularly going through COVID, is there has been an increasing emphasis on our health of our immune systems. And it's intriguing to me, if I can see, here's Tetley with their fruit teas, Superfruits Immune. Here's Actimel, which is like a drinkable yogurt from Danone. And what does it say? It's for the immune system. And that intrigues me. Why? Because what's beef good for? It's excellent for supporting the immune systems of your families, of consumers' families. I'd put that on the front of every retail beef pack. Why wouldn't you? Everybody else who can does. Why don't we in the fresh meat business? Look, still on we go. I've only got about 10 or 15 minutes now, so bear with me. That another discernible trend is that consumers are increasingly interested in where their food comes from. And leading brands, leading food products immerse people in the story, and the origin of where it comes from gives them reassurance on quality and safety. We need to do that and more of it. So I say, how do you like your beef? And the answer is, I'd like my beef with adjectives, please. What do I mean by that? Beef is the noun. I don't think there's much margin in the noun beef. I think the margin is in the adjectives. What sort of beef? Ontario, corn-fed, grass-fed, clover-fed, Farmer Jill's, Clear Creek Farms, Cape Grim, Aberdeen Angus, sustainably grown beef, organic, new season, happy, dry aged, antibiotic free. Add the adjectives and you add the margin. And that brings differentiation in the market, which is essential. Here's Cape Grim. I love it. It's from Tasmania. I know you've got examples in Canada, but I do a lot of work in Australia. And Cape Grim, I mean, there's a grisly name, and they've made the very best of it. That they present Cape Grim beef as being natural, wild, brilliant, untouched, if you will. Pure beef made by nature. A great story. We need to do more of that. And I've noticed you're not alone, because here's JBS, the largest meat company in the world. And just in the last 2 years, they've launched a whole raft of brands with different adjectives associated with their product. We need to get on with it. Here's just a silly example, perhaps, but it's a masterclass in using margin, adding adjectives to bacon in the UK for my local Waitrose premium retailer. As I say, their own college-educated pigs are exclusively used for Waitrose premium bacon because it's gourmet, free-range, air-dried, beechwood smoked, hand-cured in Suffolk in England. We're willing to pay more for those adjectives. But increasingly in our business, boy, it's a tough old business to be in, because there's a whole series of pressures and social issues which are arising, dictating choice. Remind me again what we can't eat. For example, anything with palm oil as an ingredient. Why? Because what about the orangutans in Borneo? Chicken that's been fed soy from Brazil, fish that's unsustainably sourced, any meat, milk with hormones, antibiotics, food produced with slave labor, food produced by poorly paid farmers, beef that's destroyed the Amazon, water-intensive crops, crops that have ravaged the soil. And so I think we've got to look at beef and say, post-COVID, what are the major social issues which will disturb growth in your key beef markets? Because these social issues they're not right across the globe. It will depend on the market. And look, you may think, oh my Lord, what next? But this was just released in the UK a week ago. And there's a pioneering mobile app measuring the emotional well-being of farm animals. Waitrose, the premium retailer, say, we put welfare first, but we always want to do better, which is why we're trialing an app to measure how farm animals are feeling. Now you can sort of say, well, what? But on animal welfare, the direction of travel is only going one way, and that is up. Because we know, look, in our business, in the global food industry, that we have to see necessary changes in the food system. Here's a slide from Rabobank. It's an international Dutch agribusiness bank, actually owned by farmers. And what are they saying? We need healthier diets, and that's a bit threatening for meat. Lower impact diets. We need to consume less. We're all too large. Lower rates of waste and loss along the supply chain. That's really important. We need to use resources much more responsibly. And we need to have a lower negative impact on planet and on people. We need to tread much more lightly. And I've noticed it's become hugely fashionable, and probably just as well, for goodness sake. I mean, I think on the one hand, we're in an agricultural revolution in terms of use of technology, but on the other, we're moving back to sort of ways of farming that were just part and parcel of what your grandparents were doing. And so thus the fashionability of regen ag, as it's called, regenerative agriculture. You can see all the big players in the food industry are linking to this. They want their suppliers, and which means farmers, to be into regen ag. Here's Cargill joining regen ag movement and setting goals for 10 million acres of cereals, for example. But in general, big food is turning to regen ag to meet sustainability goals and to satisfy concerned stakeholders. I put McCain in, no relation, of course, to the livestock and meat industry, but it is Canadian and a great Canadian company making huge efforts, unveiling a raft of sustainable agricultural pledges. I've just been working with PepsiCo. PepsiCo are also big in potatoes, but not for French fries. Of course, PepsiCo, who own Lay's, are into potato chips. And investing hugely with their own potato farmers in sustainable farming programs. So last one, you'll think, thank the Lord, perhaps, but how do I want to end here? I mean, unusually for me, I've picked up something. I do a lot of work in New Zealand. I mean, there's a little country, 4.5 million population, but with a very active export industry, not least in livestock and meat and dairy products. And their agriculture, food and fiber sections of their Ministry of Ag, if you will, had last year just launched their vision and strategic direction for 2030. And I liked it, and I think it relates well to you. You could just apply it to Ontario beef. What do they say? Add value. For a start, we need to be very clear that we are not a volume producer, and we should stop acting like one. Selling commodities in undifferentiated markets is a race to the bottom. Yet we have let that be our default position in New Zealand. Instead, we must select the market niches where we can excel in providing and capturing value and keep a razor sharp focus on those. I think that's something that you might want to mull on. And it's worth the, finish this question. It's worth the consumer paying a premium for Ontario beef because. Give me an answer. I'll say it again. It's worth the consumer paying a premium for Ontario beef because. If you can't give her or him an answer to that question, then she won't buy the product. I think that's the challenge. There you are at the top end of the meat market. If you're in beef and in Ontario beef, then it's a premium product, but you have to explain why it's worth more. And just linking back to what I said before, that means you need more than the noun beef. You've got to add some adjectives, and adjectives that ring with consumers who understand it and say, yes, that gives me a good reason to pay more. Thanks very much for listening. And of course, I'm available and will be with you for questions and answers. See you later.